That's right, guys. I am back to you now with yet another Barbie movie video. Now, I'm not gonna lie, and you guys can probably tell, I really liked this movie. I have seen it now 3 times, in fact. But I did a review of the film, and on that review, I was trying to be as objective as possible, noting all of the film's strengths and all of its weaknesses. And in my review, I talked a little bit about what I felt was an anti-male slant in the movie, because I was hearing a lot of people say that, and I feel like if somebody feels that a movie is treating them in a very negative light, then you should listen to them and you should try to understand where they're coming from and give voice to that. So that's why I made the opinion that I did. But I think I led you astray on that. After having seen the movie 3 times now, if someone was to come up to me and say, is the movie anti-male? I would say, no. Not at all. And I'm so angry at myself that I missed the narrative in the movie. So let me go back to this and let me talk about it. You might have heard a lot of discussion around this area of the film, but I think that it actually creates a brilliant commentary here, and let's get into why. So the context of the movie, or the Ken text, if you will, is that in Barbie Land it's a matriarchy, and Kens live in this sort of subdued state where they're not expected to have jobs, they don't have their own homes, and they're pretty much their only existence is to get a Barbie and be that Barbie's boyfriend, which is a brilliant commentary on different layers, because as I said, Ken dolls were created to just be Barbie's boyfriend. Little girls would play with them or disregard them at will. I oftentimes just disregarded them. But as such, we get this storyline which it's supposed to show, in a sense, how women have been treated by societies in the past. Being overlooked, not seen as anything more than a partner to use or disregard, and you end up feeling really bad for Ken as you see as he experiences the real world. When he sees respect for the first time, he just can't believe it. He gets excited that someone asks him what the time is and that they saw him that much. And you just feel so bad for Ken. Wait a minute. That is the entire point. Like I said, this is working on multiple levels where it's making multiple points. This movie works in a lot of hyperbole. You see that throughout the entire film as it explores its themes. On the one hand, Barbie Land is making a commentary on how women were treated in the past. Yes, it's true that in the past there were still women who had their own houses or their own jobs, but that was not what was expected of them. That was not considered the standard they should meet. In the past, like say the 1950s, the big standard was women should just find a husband and get married, and that is her big peak that she can get to. So the movie is making a commentary with the reverse of this on how women were treated in the past. But it's also using that commentary to say the same can happen to men. Because that's what we see in the reverse with it flipped on the head, and what we see in Ken's journey. He's a simp and he's subdued because he feels like his only value that he could ever have in life is due to Barbie, his girlfriend, or who's supposed to be his girlfriend. That's why he's so foolish and lost. And that's why we feel such sympathy for him, and we're supposed to. Barbie Land is sort of this dystopia where you're seeing that women finally rule the world, but it's not an equal place at all. They're essentially just doing the same thing to men that they don't want done to them. But what is the result of that? Well, we see what happens. Ken goes to the real world, and if you're a person who's coming out of the girl power land of Barbie Land, that sort of utopia or dystopia, then you're gonna think that the world is run by men. But as he sees pretty quickly, it's not just that men can go around and get everything they want. That's not reality. But he still creates this cartoonish version of masculinity in his mind, this sort of alpha male that makes him think that he's finally going to get that validation. This movie shows both alpha females and alpha males. These archetypes that are these flawed ideals about what women and men are supposed to be. For the ideal woman we see in Barbie Land initially, it's this person who has this amazing career and who has everything together. But at the same time, they're really dismissive to anybody else who's flawed. They're really judgmental towards Barbies who look weird or who look ugly or who aren't perfect, and they're very dismissive to Kens who, as Barbie says in her own bigoted fashion, are just superfluous. And Barbie is very kind to Ken despite him being overly needy on her, but she's also really cruel to him in a way that she doesn't really realize, which is what causes him to be even more needy. And what the movie is showing here is that the result of either side being put down or feeling invalidated for who they are is someone being pushed to become a negative extreme. The response to the 1950s that I mentioned was this new idea that the big peak of a woman should be to get an amazing career. And in that way, a lot of times motherhood was just overlooked or rejected or put down. And we see that in the movie as it parodies in the beginning that once a Barbie doll came along, which represented the modern woman, girls just crushed their dolls. But as such, we also see that that is what can happen to men. In this society, as in Barbie land, yes, we are talking about some pretty deep subject matter with Barbies, and that's part of why I love this movie. They feel subdued and underlooked, and so they go to an unhealthy archetype as a way to try to get validation, now treating the Barbies with about as much respect as they were treated on. And it's that imbalance that this movie is noting. But what is the ultimate point of it? Well, that these imbalances and these unrealistic ideals are actually harmful, and they do not bring out the best in us. The Barbies were overly judgmental, shallow, and saw things in a very narrow perspective. Ken dolls became the exact same thing as they were trying to overcome it. And that is what's so important at the end. When we see Barbie mature and become a different person, she realizes her flaws. And a lot of people were upset, like, why aren't Barbie and Ken a thing in this movie? Well, that would actually destroy Ken's entire arc. Because if the movie ended with Barbie finally falling in love with Ken, then he would still be a person who's overly dependent and defined by her. And the entire point of his storyline is that he shouldn't be. Barbie says in the movie, you're not your girlfriend or your house or your job, which once again, with these idealized archetypes that we create, we oftentimes seek validations from these material things. She tells him that he needs to find out who he is beyond her so that he's not overly dependent and controlled by the idea of her liking him. And that actually is a very powerful message. Now, another thing that I pointed out in my review is that yes, as this movie goes on and Barbie Land tries to become a more equal society, they don't really give the Kens too much. They just get a lower level cabinet, but no positions on the Supreme Court. But there is a line in the movie that I misheard. The narrator sighs and says, well, I guess the Kens have to start somewhere. And then she offers this little bit of hope that one day Kens will have as much power in Barbie Land as women do in the real world. Now, the point of that line is sort of a call to action. Do you guys think that there is actually equality with women in the real world? The movie doesn't seem to think so, but that if we want to see this sort of dystopian land get better, then we need to be like that as well, which narratively I think works. But the deal behind the movie is Greta Gerwig is making a lot of observations about male and female dynamics, and once again, this movie works with a lot of hyperbole and stereotypes for all sides. As such, we do spend a lot of the time of the movie looking at negative male stereotypes, whether it's in Barbie Land where they're put down or when they become alpha males, or the negative male stereotypes in the real world. So I still think that it is perfectly understandable why a man, might watch this movie and feel a bit offended. That is unfortunately the way the structure of the movie can come off, but there is a deeper point to the movie. It is talking about both sides, and I think that that is the entire point. If you read interviews behind the scenes, Greta Gerwig and Margot Robbie really cared about the character of Ken. They held off on filming this movie until they made sure that they could get Ryan Gosling to play it because they knew that he'd be the only one to pull off the role. And he does so flawlessly. People are talking about how they feel like Ken was unintentionally sympathetic and unintentionally had a point. No, he very much intentionally did. If you read interviews behind the scenes, this was the goal of the people creating this movie. They want to see both sides, actually. And it's not like there wasn't any male input on this movie either. While the actual movie was directed by Greta Gerwig solely, the script was written by her and her husband, Noah Baumbach, where they also worked together on the movie Marriage Story.
Every day I wake up and I hope you're dead. Dead like if I could guarantee Henry would be okay. I'd hope you get an illness and then get hit by a car and die.
That was a very deep film about the dynamics of a marriage falling apart, so you can tell that this movie is going to be very deep and have lots of layers too. Margot Robbie also produced this movie with her husband, Tom Ackerley, so you can see that he probably had a lot of input on the movie too. Now, to the men watching this video, if you still are watching this video, I bet you don't have any interest in seeing this Barbie film because it's a Barbie movie. But I have to say that it is a lot more than that. The entire point of this movie, as I've always understood it, is to slip a deeper film into a mainstream movie, and I just think that that's great. This movie is about to hit $1 billion at the box office, and the reason that it's doing that is it's connecting, no, I won't stop, to the way a lot of people feel. So if you don't want to see the movie in theaters, I would still recommend that you give it a watch on streaming because there is a whole lot to this movie and I think it's actually brilliant. I just can't stop going back to it and getting a different experience every time, whether it's the themes of the movie or the fun Easter eggs, like the fact that Alan was a discontinued toy meant to be Ken's best friend. Well, the camera cuts to him and he gets super upset whenever something bad happens to Ken. They still don't have one conversation with each other, and Alan represents the but not all men in the Ken takeover sequence, and I think that's great. Also, I love the Easter egg of how the bratty girl who's really mean to Barbie is actually named after a Bratz doll, Sasha, whose nickname was Bunny Boo, who her mother actually calls her at one point in the film, "Hey Bunny Boo." That's just brilliant. Mattel will never let the Bratz doll controversy go. Like I said, a lot to see in this movie, and I think that anybody should give it a watch. But I realized that with all the videos I've done on this movie, I still haven't given it a rating. And okay, here it goes. I am rating Barbie a 10 out of 10.